Hello and welcome back to my channel. I'm Helen and today I'm going to be sharing my January wrap-up with you. So January wasn't the best start to the year for me and it wasn't my best ever reading month, but I did discover a new favourite that was in a medium that I wouldn't normally ever use, so I'm really glad about that. The rest of the books, some of them were great, some of them were less great, and I didn't read as many as I wanted to, so this isn't going to match up that well with my TBR, but we can't have everything. The first book I read was House of Many Ways by Diana Wynne Jones. I absolutely loved it. In fact, it was a reread and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. House of Many Ways is the third book in the Howl's Moving Castle series and it follows Charmaine Marshall, who has been asked to look after her great uncle's house. However, the problem is Charmaine wants to do nothing but eat cake or eat pastries and read books. She quickly discovers that her great uncle's house has a few problems, most of them being the fact that the doors don't seem to lead to the doors they're meant to lead to. Also, there's a small dog who has the tendency to grow and shrink. It is an incredibly funny book. The characters are really witty and there are a wonderful number of twists in it. This is my favourite book in the Howl's Moving Castle series and rereading it this month was so much fun. So the first book I read in January was a massive disappointment, which is always upsetting, but oh well. It was The Book of Dust Volume 2, The Secret Commonwealth by Philip Pullman. The Book of Dust is the companion series to His Dark Materials and it follows some of the same characters. La Belle Sauvage, the first book in the series, followed different characters and this one follows Lyra, who is in His Dark Materials. However, it is a few years after the events. She is now 21 and studying at Oxford. This book is essentially a travel. She is running away from certain things, looking for certain things. That's all I can say without spoiling a lot of it. And she is trying to find this mystical place she's heard of. There's also reference to a crisis that's going on about rose oil or rose water, and the church, the magisterium, are still sort of being nefarious in the background as they are throughout most of His Dark Materials. The villain in this book is a rising star in the magisterium. That was the one thing I did love about this book. The villain was absolutely fantastic. He was so nasty, he made my skin crawl, and I do think that Philip Pullman is really good at writing villains. However, there are a lot of things I didn't enjoy about this book and I ended up giving it 3 out of 5 stars. The first big thing was a sort of weird reoccurrence I noticed throughout the book. So the first time I noticed this was when Lyra comments that she doesn't feel harassed or she doesn't feel in danger of being harassed by older men. I think by this she meant like men over 40 or 50 maybe, which I was a bit like. Then also, Lyra's teacher, or teacher when she was younger, was in love with her. And I was like, that's such a creepy relationship, especially since he apparently fell in love with her when she was really young, like when she was 15 or something. I get by this book they are both consenting adults and if a relationship was to occur, they would both be able to consent to it. But when you fall in love with a 15-year-old and you're like 30, that's creepy. And also the power imbalance really is weird. So that was the second thing. And then the third thing, so continuing this theme of random little, I guess slightly sexual things about this book that made me really uncomfortable, there is a scene, a sexual assault scene in this book that isn't, you don't see it coming at all. There are no trigger warnings and I didn't see how it furthered the plot at all. Like, you could read this book and completely skip over that scene and it would not change your perception of the book at all. It was a really disturbing scene that didn't add to the plot in any way. It didn't further the plot and basically it just sort of appeared for a page and a half and then disappeared, and the character who experienced it seemed to have absolutely no underlying trauma from it. I mean, obviously they might in the next book. This was very near the end, but I still did not see the point of it. It seemed a bit gratuitous, and I hate gratuitous scenes in books, especially when they concern sexual violence. The other reason I didn't love this book was because throughout it, Lyra is on a journey. And there is a reason for this journey, but along the journey she keeps doing things that seem to me to be fairly useless. So I can't say any of them without spoiling it, but basically she keeps sort of meeting people and doing things that to me just seem to be a way to crowbar the title into the rest of the book. I didn't care. I was like, I'd much rather you focused on one thing than try to focus on 50 different storylines that in this book did just seem to be a bridge between the first book and the second book. Also, this is just a list of grievances now. This book ended on a cliffhanger, which, it's fine, cliffhangers are fine, but the first book in the series was written 19 years before this one, or set 19 years before this one. And then this one happened and I didn't feel it was very continuous for this one to be ending on a massive cliffhanger and then there to be another one after that. I wanted there to be a continuity between the three books that I felt like the cliffhanger really sort of destroyed, because it almost made the first book seem like a different series to this book, despite there being the same characters in both of them. I didn't enjoy it. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars, and while I will read the final book in the series, I am quite disappointed in this one, and I do hope that some of the things that occurred in this are resolved in the next book, and I hope it doesn't sort of just not mention any of them again. The next book I read this month was my only non-fiction read of the month, and it was The Five by Hayley Rubenhold. This book is about the 5 women who were murdered by Jack the Ripper, and it discusses each of their lives in detail and talks about the conditions of Victorian London at the time. This book was incredibly enjoyable and I ended up giving it 4.5 out of 5 stars. One of my favourite things about it was it did not in any way discuss the murder of any of the victims. Instead, it talked about their lives up until that night and where they were that night, and then it talked about the coroner's inquest. Also, this book didn't focus at all on trying to establish the identity of Jack the Ripper, as I was incredibly unsure about whether to give this 4 or 4.5 stars. But the reason I gave it 4.5 stars was the conclusion and the final line, which is written on the back, and it was, "The victims of Jack the Ripper were never just prostitutes. They were daughters, wives, mothers, sisters and lovers. They were women. They were human beings." I loved that that was the entire ethos behind this book, and the whole idea of it was that the victims of Jack the Ripper deserved to have their story told, and Hayley Rubenhold really managed to do that, and she did it in an engaging and fascinating way. The next book I read in January was The Beautiful by Renée Ahdieh. This is a YA fantasy, or a YA historical fiction, which follows Céline Rousseau, a young woman who has fled from Paris, where something terrible has happened in her past, to New Orleans. However, when she gets to New Orleans, she discovers that her past is not so easy to hide, especially when she gets drawn into La Cour de Lion, a group of mysterious men and women who seem to have some dark secret. At their head is Bastien Saint-Germain, a charismatic man who she becomes more and more attracted to. However, while this is happening, there are murders going on around the city. I really enjoyed this. I thought it was a lot of fun, and I loved the gothic romance vibes it gave me. Gothic romance is my favourite genre, so I absolutely adored that in this. I can see why some people were disappointed, as this was marketed as a vampire novel, and it wasn't really that. There were vampires, but they were quite minor characters compared to a lot of other aspects of the story, but I still did really enjoy it and I cannot wait for the sequel. The next book I read in January was The Iron Trial by Holly Black and Cassandra Clare. This is the first book in the Magisterium series, which follows Cal, a boy who has been told all his life about the dangers of this magic school. However, he needs to apply, so he tries his best to fail the tests, and then he doesn't. He gets in, which is not good. So he goes to this magic school where he quickly discovers that maybe the stuff his father has been telling him all his life isn't true, and maybe there's something else underneath it. And from there we basically have a mystery. There's a mystery about who he is, while at the same time they are learning all these things at this school, so magic essentially. The reason I didn't love this, I did really enjoy it and I do think I will read the next one at some point, but I felt like it was trying too hard to be whimsical and I ended up not really loving the writing style. It was a very quick read, but I disliked the main character and found being inside his head really annoying most of the time. So yeah, I gave this 3.5 out of 5 stars. So the final book I read in January, it was Lore Olympus, the webcomic, which is written and illustrated by Rachel Smythe. This is a retelling of the Hades and Persephone myth, and I absolutely adored it. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars, and I'd like to thank my friend Jenny who recommended it. This webcomic is amazing. I absolutely loved it, and it is so engrossing and fascinating, and the art style is absolutely beautiful. So those are the 6 books I read in January. Lore Olympus is still being uploaded every week, so technically I'm still reading it, but it's on Goodreads, so I'm counting it as read. I did have a good reading month in January. While certain books were massive disappointments, other ones were slightly surprising, and other ones I just love. I am hopefully going to have a better reading month in February than I did in January and get a bit further towards my goal on Goodreads, which is 120 books, which is seeming more and more unrealistic every single time I look at it. But until then, we'll just see what I read. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, I'd love it if you could comment or like and subscribe. If you've read any of these and your opinion differs to mine, please let me know in the comments down below. And if there are any books you want to recommend based off these and my reactions to them, again, please let me know, and I'll hopefully see you in my next video. If you want to find me anywhere else, I'm on Twitter at catsandteabooks, on Instagram at readingwithcatsandtea, and I'll link my Goodreads down below as always. I'll see you in my next video. Bye!